This is it, guys. Victoria 3 has been circling the drain of death for a while now after being quite poorly received across much of the community, but its willpower to survive has been quite impressive. Despite seeming to be one of the worst map games we've ever seen, the player base is still at a relatively healthy 5 to 7,000 players as of early June. I can't pin down exactly why Victoria 3 lives on in the hearts of so many, but I know why it lives on in my heart. It truly provides a unique experience, and of course, line go up. Sphere of Influence and its accompanying update are both pivotal to the life of this game in my opinion, and I have to say, I think the 1.7 update has made the game significantly more fun to play on account of two things. First, performance and AI have been improved quite a bit, making the game much less of a slog to get through. Secondly, Victoria 3 now simulates the concept of a mixed economy and economic imperialism. It sounds crazy, honestly, realizing that one of the main themes of the game, economic imperialism, hadn't been implemented until this DLC, but it's here now, and I'm glad for it. I made a video a long time ago about how I felt Victoria 3 needed to simulate mixed economies in order to be more fun. I believe this update has shown me, and hopefully others too, why the game needed this so badly. With mixed economies, we have obtained core creativity in Victoria 3. That isn't to say the game had no creativity before, it certainly did. The thing is, the creativity was in the form of extremely minor mechanics in the game like assimilation, conversion, or a handful of laws. Now the main gameplay loop of economic development and imperialism has creativity. If I had to summarize my thoughts on 1.7, it would be with the word expression. You can express yourself in Victoria 3 now, and it is such a huge addition to the game. Suddenly, laws like interventionism and agrarianism are actually viable, although yes, laissez-faire is still really powerful. The thing is that, whereas before laissez-faire was just the best choice, now there's a reason to use interventionism because laissez-faire disables some mechanics like nationalization. I'm getting ahead of myself though, this is just the introduction. I've had a lot of trouble writing this review, to be honest. It's hard to organize my thoughts nicely so that I can best present what's going on in this update simply because there's just so much good going on here. No buts or anything, just lots of good. But this is still Victoria 3. The game is still frustratingly opaque at times. Some things don't work right, although maybe the release patch will fix some of that. The military stuff is annoying, and my fronts keep breaking and some features feel pretty half-baked. This was all in the previous patch. That's been the theme with Paradox these days. Half-baked. Sphere of Influence, I will say, feels at least 3/4 baked. There's a lot more good here than bad, and if you're a Victoria 3 fan, it's a blessing to even get a quarter-baked product these days, to be frank. The main gameplay loops of Victoria 3 have always been underwhelming, and yet through their uniqueness have managed to capture an audience anyway. This DLC does a good job of playing into the game's strengths by working on those unique gameplay loops, and in that sense, it has succeeded as a DLC. Before I keep meandering though, let's actually talk about those changes. I'm going to start with all the economic stuff and talk about the diplomacy stuff after, just because I'm more interested in the economic changes. Let's get into it. The most obvious change to the game is the new mixed economic systems. No longer is the entire country privatized or completely collectivized. Instead, the private sector and the government sector act independently and build things for themselves, with different rewards for each. I was disappointed to see that there's no way to give buildings to the local workforce, sadly, except through collectivization or with homesteading on non-plantation agriculture, which to me is a missed opportunity. As in previous Victoria 3 patches, the construction sector is divided between private and government building, with the investment pool funding private buildings and the budget funding government buildings. What's different now is that when the government builds something, it is government owned, meaning its dividends go into the budget. Depending on your economic law, different amounts of the dividends go to the investment pool, and in all economic laws, some of the dividends are lost to represent inefficiency, and all government buildings get their throughput bonus cut in half. This is a good way to balance the theoretical power of government-owned buildings, I think, and makes you feel the power of privatization. Private buildings function like previous patches, where their dividends are split amongst the owners, usually capitalists and aristocrats, and put into the investment pool to make more buildings. At any time, as long as you don't have the laissez-faire economic law, you can nationalize a building, which takes money out of your gold reserve to turn a privately owned building into a government-owned building. You can do it without spending any of your gold reserves with Command Economy 2, but Command Economy is still a level 4 tech to get, so by the time most people research it, they've already stopped playing the game. Inversely, you can put up a building for privatization, which lets capitalists buy the building from you. Part of the money goes into the investment pool, and part of it goes into your budget, depending on which economic law you have. I'm not going to go into exact numbers because, I don't want to waste too much time. If you want the highest GDP possible, laissez-faire is definitely your best bet, but if you want to get your budget a bit higher, It can actually be an okay play to stay on interventionism and try to keep some profitable government businesses. This makes some sense on someone like Prussia, whose massive army needs a large government budget, or on Qing, whose GDP is already pretty high but who has trouble taxing its pops. Government dividends are not a form of taxation, so you don't need to spam bureaucracy to make it work. The purpose of explaining the specific use cases here is to show that yes, other laws are now viable. You can even make agrarianism work simply because it has a higher government dividend efficiency than interventionism. If you're highly dependent on government dividends, it's not a bad idea to go agrarian and just fund your country with opium money. This is a huge positive. The other major economic contribution to the game is foreign investment, which is something I think has less impact than it might seem. You can ask for or offer investment rights in another country, which allows either you to build in their country or them to build in yours, or both. If America builds something in Japan, for example, then the dividends go to the American government or American capitalists, depending on who built the building, but the wages and resources go to the pops and the market of Japan. The issue with this system is that controlling a foreign economy doesn't give you power over them, really. In my mind, the scenario of a powerful European country controlling all the basic resources of a smaller country would lend them some kind of power over that country, beyond the relatively underwhelming leverage system, which I'll get into later. Let's say America controls a significant portion of Japan's iron and coal or something, and then America decides it wants a treaty port in Japan. Well, in my mind, the American-owned industries ought to shut down during the ensuing war, assuming one breaks out. I'd imagine Japan would back down, knowing that the Americans control a ton of their raw materials, but in the game, those American industries just keep operating like nothing is going on during the war. What the hell? This begs the question of the possibility that Japan becomes defiant and seizes all those American industries in response to the war. Well, they can, but they have to compensate the owners unless they have a command economy, or they can force privatization via a very high infamy war goal that will require them to defeat America in a war. Keep in mind that the privatization happens after the war is over, not before. Not that it matters, since foreign investments continue operating as normal during war with their owners. Foreign investments, to me, suck. I've never found myself factoring it into my gameplay, and when the AI offers to invest in me, I just say yes because it has no consequences. They're just contributing to my GDP and getting some dividends, but the AI doesn't build high-profit buildings. In theory, it would be wise for the AI to focus on building plantations, which are low-wage, high-profit buildings. But instead, the British tend to build up my railways, steel plants, and tool workshops for me. It doesn't make any sense to do that. When I get investment rights in Britain, I immediately go for all that opium in India and make huge money on it. There's also a lot of opportunity to screw over another country by destroying their arable land with private investment, but it'll always be more effective to just conquer them anyway. The point is that foreign investment feels pretty pointless. It's generally better to just build in your own country, since it's very rare to actually have nothing more to build in your own land. For a country like, say, Belgium, it could be wise to invest in another nation, but it would always be wiser to grab a state in China and just build there if you truly have no more stuff to build back home. Good luck fully employing even one state in China for a long time. What I'd like to see is foreign investment being more of a way to puppeteer another country. I think that if you can control, say, 50% of a country's total GDP, you should be able to turn them into a protectorate for free or something, since that's pretty much exactly how Egypt became an English colony. Once Egypt owed way too much money to the British, they just came in and repossessed those debts in the form of the entire country, basically. To me, the best mechanics in these kinds of games are ones that have some historical inspiration, and obviously these systems are historically inspired, but they're just not dynamic enough to feel reflective of that history. When Persia nationalized its oil from the British, which I know happened way after the era of Victoria III, but same principle, this had huge consequences for Persia's future and for the British Petroleum Company. In Victoria III, nationalizing an industry gives a small relations hit depending on the number of buildings nationalized, and, critically, does not incite any kind of war. I mean, relations hits could lead to war, yes, but if you ask me, a country nationalizing your property, especially without compensation, should make declaring war on them cost much less infamy. How about for every 1 point of relations lost from nationalization, that's a 1% reduction on infamy for the offended country to add war goals. Right now, it's a meta strategy to allow every country in the game to invest in you if they're willing to, and let them build up your economy, and once you're satisfied with their investments, you break the investment pact and nationalize it all. Even if you're paying for it, the sudden influx of dividends is pretty worthwhile, and if you manage to play late enough to get command economy, then it's an immense economy you just get for nothing. The AI in Victoria 3 is still pretty passive, but they've gotten more aggressive with this patch, so I do think adding that infamy reduction mechanic alongside a more aggressive AI could see an actual sense of diplomatic tension over watching more and more of your country's potential dividends be taken away from you, and the possibility of getting all those dividends for yourself. Of course, the issue of the AI investing in bad stuff is still present. All of this I'm saying in theory, but in reality, I'm fine with some foreign power owning half my tooling industry, considering there are no consequences to that, and the tools don't make a ton of profits. My capitalists own the opium and the iron mine. My government owns the coal and the wood, among other profitable industries. In many games I've had, the British had owned a significant portion of my railways, which is totally fine with me. It's not like railways tend to be very profitable, unlike reality, but that's neither here nor there. Okay. So most of you know that I can yap on and on pretty much forever, so rather than do that, I'm going to cut the economic portion of this review off right now. In summary, mixed economies are great, foreign investment is pretty pointless, but not harmful to the game. Overall, it's called a 7 out of 10. I know I sound pretty negative, but I really have to emphasize how great it is for the game to have mixed economies in terms of strategic depth and creative expression. Take foreign investments and put those in the trash. Pointless. Oh, one last thing that I'm adding at the end, because I forgot to mention it before and I need to get this video done, so no time to integrate it nicely. The UI for nationalization and privatization sucks ass. It's awful. It's a million clicks to nationalize stuff, and it's awful. It makes me actively avoid using Command Economy just because it's a huge pain to nationalize everything. What foreign investments do give you is leverage, which is part of the power block mechanics. Let's take a look at the diplomacy changes, which mostly come in the form of power blocks. As you'd expect, economy and diplomacy are tied to each other in this DLC quite strongly, but there are additions to diplomacy in the form of power blocks, which are available in the base game but expand significantly with the Sphere of Influence DLC. A power block is, when boiled down to its mechanics, a series of modifiers and parameters that apply to a collection of nations that have either good relations or a master-servant relationship. Unfortunately, most of them kinda suck. Where mixed economies created an opportunity for expression with how it made viable previously unviable systems, power blocks have introduced mostly pointless modifiers that just give some numbers with a handful of exceptions. There are a handful of ideological pillars that define the power block. Then you can pick up to 4 mandates that give bonuses to all power block members. Some of these mandates are good, most of them are pointless. Unfortunately, the sense of identity that a power block ought to have is just non-existent. As an example, Austria starts the game as leader of the Metternich system, which is an ideological union. All power blocks have a number called cohesion, which is a bar from 0 to 100 that gives bonuses to your leverage generation other nations, and an increase in mandate generation. Increasing cohesion requires different things depending on what type of power block you have. As an ideological union, Austria's goal is to make all its members have the same government type, meaning everyone should strive to be an autocratic monarchy. You can spend cohesion to force a nation in your bloc to change its laws, or you can impose a law on them, which basically asks them nicely to start changing the law to what you want it to be. Now here's the thing. The AI will pretty often refuse your request to change its law, which is fine. It shouldn't be so easy, and that's okay. The thing I don't like is that cohesion is drained very quickly by even just one nation in the power block being a republic. And Austria starts the game with Kraków in its power block. Kraków is a republic with elections. Immediately, your cohesion is slashed. You can spend cohesion to force Kraków to become an autocratic monarchy, but you have no cohesion because Kraków is not an autocratic monarchy. You can ask them to change their laws, but imposing laws is still a pretty bad system. Imposing laws just makes them attempt to pass the law, which can take a very long time, or can just outright fail. When your cohesion is drained, you generate fewer mandates, which means you can't build up the identity of your bloc and get those sweet modifiers, which is the whole point of power block. This issue tends to happen with most of the power block types, although the ideological union suffers from this the most. In terms of actual usefulness, the Trade League is far and away the best choice, followed by Sovereign Empire in a distant second place, while everyone else is fighting desperately for last place. The only one I can somewhat accept is the Religious Convocation, which does have roleplay value as it allows you to change the state religion of a country. That's actually quite cool. Honestly, maybe I'm being too harsh on blocks, but I just wanted a lot more expression from them. The roleplay opportunities just aren't there, but I will say, it's a lot more than no power blocks. Power blocks are a positive addition, even if I expected more, and this is where I have to make sure everyone here knows I'm a harsh critic, and that I do actually think power blocks are a nice addition to the game. Anything which doesn't actively harm the game is pretty much always a positive. The problem is how expensive the DLC is compared to what the mechanics offer. If you're a mod enjoyer, power blocks have a ton of potential. I went into the code, made myself a mod with the early access build to create a cultural union that lets me change my power block members' primary cultures. I can see modders taking this stuff pretty far, and the modability of power blocks is nice. They're very easy to work with, and I'm a total novice with Paradox game modding. Certain power block mandates are super broken, and in a video coming up very soon, you'll see me exploit that. Basically, the migration game is back, although I'm certain any fun stuff with power blocks will get patched out eventually. Power blocks, I think, are going to have the fun optimized out of them, as people won't be picking stuff based on what shapes the identity of their block, but instead picking what gives the best effects. Beyond that, we have to talk about leverage now, which is probably the most underwhelming part of the diplomacy editions. Leverage is a reflection of your country's power over another country. It can be acquired with good relations, bankrolls, alliances, similar laws and governments, and so on, or it can be acquired by controlling more of their GDP and being a militarily threatening neighbor. The problem is that generating leverage is very pointless, it often feels like. In general, the rewards for adding members to your power block aren't all that good, especially because new members might just tank your cohesion. The purpose of getting more members is that you can become a higher ranked block, which increases your mandate generation rate, and you also need a minimum number of members to activate more mandate slots. Now let's ask ourselves, what other diplomatic systems have been added? Well, there are lobbies, which are not very impressive. There are diplomatic catalysts, which are basically psycho AI lampshading, and you have subject interactions, which are a small but much needed addition to the game. Let's back up to catalysts because I said something kind of out of left field there and I'd like to expand on that. Catalysts aren't actually a change to how the AI functions. They're just a pop-up that tells you the justification for the AI's decision. To be clear, this is a good thing, but if you've been frustrated by psychotic AI plays in the past, they're still in here. In fact, the AI is more aggressive than before, so I'd expect even more psycho AI, although I will say, the AI is much better about staying dedicated to plays, staying with its allies, and backing down when it seems correct to do so. The AI clearly has been improved, but not immensely. You can still use all the same cheesy tactics from the past to beat the AI, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about lobbies. A lobby is basically a collection of interest groups that like or dislike another country. They do what they want, they gain approval, and sometimes they give you a bonus to making diplomatic pacts with the rivals of the group they're targeting. For example, an American anti-Britain lobby might demand that you embargo Britain, and then offer you an opportunity to make an alliance with France. The opportunity adds reasons for the AI to accept your offer, so it's useless outside of the AI, and that's all they do. They add some other modifiers, like increasing your resistance to war support losses in war with the country that you have an anti-lobby against. And lobbies generate leverage or decrease leverage for the target country respectively. Aside from that, lobbies are mostly an RNG system where sometimes you'll be motivated to pursue new diplomatic relations. Again, it's not a bad addition. This is the main point of the DLC, I'd say. Nothing in it is particularly bad, just a lot of it is relatively mediocre. To be honest though, it is refreshing to just have some interesting new systems that don't feel annoying. Most of these mechanics are hands-off and work in the background to make the game slightly more dynamic. I can't complain about these at the end of the day. Subject interactions do change the way overlords and subjects interact in a lot of good ways. You can spend influence to get more money out of your subjects, and you can do a handful of small interactions to make them more loyal and improve their country, but overall, it's nothing hugely special. I do enjoy the new way autonomy works. Once Liberty Desire is low enough, you can lower autonomy for free. I do kind of wish that if Liberty Desire hit 100, they could demand higher autonomy without triggering a war. As an overlord, you can basically ignore all Liberty Desire unless you want to reduce autonomy. The 100 Liberty Desire doesn't really matter. If you're a subject, it sucks because you can't stack up all this Liberty Desire, and you get nothing to help you fight your overlord for it, since you can always ask for support and independence from another nation no matter what your Liberty Desire is. Ultimately, this is an improvement, and a welcome one, and to be honest, it works as advertised. It is extremely inoffensive. I know that sounds pretty negative, but considering how critical I could be, that's pretty much a glowing review. Anyway, that's pretty much all the diplomatic additions, which brings me to the last part of the DLC, the Great Game. So, the big new journal entry is the Great Game, and this is where I have to come clean. I haven't played much of the Great Game, just because journal entries don't interest me much. I'm sorry guys, I just don't get particularly turned on by stuff like this, but from what I've seen of other people talking about it, the journal entry is barely functional. I did one playthrough as Persia, which I didn't record, and things were just constantly not working how they were supposed to. I reported what bugs I found, and with luck they'll be fixed for the release, so if we tried the journal entry and it works, great, that's good. Because of the potential that the Great Game is fixed in the release patch, I won't let it dock my opinion of the patch overall too much, especially since I didn't really give it a fair shake. That being said, it's also the fault of the game that the journal entry just doesn't feel appealing. But of course, to be very clear, I am knowingly biased against journal entries, and therefore I recommend you to not rely on my review to evaluate if you like the Great Game. I personally found it to be too buggy to worth participating in. Let's talk about one last thing before we wrap up the review, and that is the AI improvements and performance improvements. I'm calling these the peak changes because ultimately, the AI and performance improvements are actually the most goated part of the update. I even told the devs as much when I finished my first playthrough, which will be up as a video pretty soon by the way, consider subscribing to see that. Anyway, how has the AI changed? Well, the AI is aggressive now. If it smells weakness, it will pounce, and that makes for some pretty insane plays, but in this case, it's good. You'll be seeing Britain be much more of an imperial power instead of the weird role of world police they sometimes played in 1.6. Britain, France, and even the United States are much more active in the world. Unfortunately, this competence hits Austria more than Prussia, so now Prussia tends to fail to form Germany. It does happen here and there, but not as often as it probably should. Russia tries to get a lot more control over nations like Persia and Afghanistan, likely on account of the Great Game, and in general, playing a smaller unrecognized power is so much scarier than it once was because of this. Great powers can and will gun for you, so it's pretty important to become aligned with a power bloc. You will find yourself actively seeking protection and patronization from a great power unless you're Qing or Japan, which can actually stand up on their own with enough time. That being said, the AI still falls for naval invasions, and they still have trouble turning on higher level mobilization options on their army, meaning the longer the game goes on, the stronger you'll get relative to the AI. Alongside that, performance has improved a ton. Although I've been told that the performance improvements from early access will likely not be as substantial on release, because a lot of the performance hits come from making the AI more competent. The more competent the AI, the less performance you get to keep, and I personally do agree with making the AI more competent. I do believe that the release performance will still be an immense improvement over the 1.6 performance, so I'm glad anyway. Performance being improved makes the game so much better to play, and that's why it's absolutely the most goated improvement. So this is where we wind down, I suppose. I've covered pretty much everything in the patch, and now I want to talk about my overall thoughts of the 1.7 patch and the Sphere of Influence DLC. I'm feeling overall quite positive about patch 1.7 and Sphere of Influence. I felt the game really pull me in, so much so that my streaming and content production in general suffered because I was so into the game. I found myself thinking of new strategies and ultimately finding that many of them were at least viable. That was huge for me. Like I said earlier, this update brings creative expression and varied gameplay to Victoria 3, and I honestly can't think of anything more valuable than that. The economic changes are very nice and change the game immensely, but the UI for nationalization and privatization sucks. The diplomacy changes are welcome, but not hugely consequential. Power blocks open up a huge opportunity for modders to make more interesting stuff, but the base game power block modifiers are okay at best. They're just nothing crazy. I'm a big fan of parameters compared to just multipliers and modifiers. There are very few parameters, sadly. External Trade 3, for example, lets you trade with anyone, even without an interest. That's pretty cool, right? But if you run a power block, you probably already have interests all over the place, so I don't know if it makes much sense. It's nothing bad. Again, the running theme here is positive, but not crazy. I'm going to give this update and DLC rating together since I do consider them a package, and I haven't played 1.7 without the DLC, so it's hard to evaluate just the patch. To me, the Sphere of Influence 1.7 patch is a very real 7 out of 10, and I don't mean an IGN 7, I mean a like 10 is a masterpiece, 5 is average, 0 is a disaster. This is a positive addition to the game, which is completely competent and accomplishes its goals relatively successfully, but isn't anything particularly special. I'd say it earns 4 of its points from the economic changes, 1 of its points from the thematic changes, and then 2 points from the performance and UI changes. I predict that the Steam reviews will be about 55% to 70%, so I'm giving it an optimistic 7. There's a lot of ill will in the Paradox community as a whole, so although I think the DLC is a 7, I think the fact that some people review only the DLC and not its accompanying patch, alongside the aforementioned ill will, may drag the DLC rating down a bit. If I'm right, then cool. If not, then it's just my opinion, I guess. I hope this review helps you decide if you want the DLC or not. At the end of the day, if you're a Victoria 3 player, you might want to actually try the 1.7 patch by itself first, since the DLC mechanics play into the free patch editions pretty well. If you like patch 1.7, you'll likely enjoy the Sphere of Influence DLC. That's all from me. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and check out my Twitch or YouTube stream where I'm currently doing a mega campaign that I'm very much looking forward to getting into Victoria 3. Thank you for your time.